What's up guys, it's Andrew from Motorcycles Off-Road, and today we're going to compare the Honda 300L to the Honda 250L. This video should be very useful for someone looking to upgrade maybe from the 250L to the 300L, or if someone's looking to get into dual sporting and they're wondering if the 250L will be a good enough bike for them. If you are interested in a full breakdown of the Honda 300L alone, where I go into more detail about that bike by itself, I've already done that review, as well as a comparison to the KLX300 and the DRZ400. I will have those videos pinned in the first comment below. If you have seen those videos, they were very well received, and I will be keeping the same format for this review / comparison. So the 250L. According to Kelley Blue Book, this was the second most sought after bike in 2020 as far as value and searched on their site, as well as this was the second most requested review on the channel. So since everyone asked, we had to do it. This is the format of how we're going to break down this review, and today we're going to answer the question, is the 250L or the 300L the perfect bike for you? We're going to talk about changes overall, specifications and price, on-road experience, off-road capability, reliability and service intervals, looks and aesthetics, which bike should you buy, and my final thoughts. So let's get into it, guys. Alright, let's talk about some changes that were made, changes that might not be absolute apparent just by looking at the bike. Right about the time that the Honda CRF300L came out, the KLX300 came out. I'm going to be completely honest with you guys, I prefer the KLX250 over the CRF Honda 250. But when it comes to the 300cc bikes, or the 286/292 bikes, I prefer the Honda 300L over the KLX300. The main thing is, the Honda made leaps and bounds when it comes to improvements, whereas the KLX just added a big bore kit. So when you're moving from the Honda 250L to the 300L, there's many changes, including the engine. KLX was just a big bore, the Honda actually stroked their engine. By adding a longer stroke to the engine, it adds a lot more low-end torque, which is exactly what you want with a bike like this, and it correlates into 18% more torque. They upgraded the suspension. Not only is the Honda 300L suspension more stiff and more suitable for off-road than the 250L, but they also added more travel in the front and the rear. This is a point where a lot of people like to bash the suspension, and I'm going to say the suspension's not that bad. I managed with it just fine. It will be an upgrade I do. It's a few $100 for a YSS shock that'll be sprung for my weight. But to be honest, you just turn the preload and it works pretty good. Next, it has a new leaner frame. Now, though the seat height is basically the same, it actually feels a little bit lower when you're sitting on it, not when you approach it. And the real reason for that is it's a thinner bike, so it's easier to get your feet on the ground. By doing this, there was also a loss of 14 pounds overall on the bike. That 14 pounds plus the increase in stroke mats out to about 13% better power to weight ratio than the 250L. There's a slimmer gas tank, 2.1 gallons or 7.8 liters. There's a new slipper clutch and also a redesigned transmission, which I love. A lot of times when I do these bike reviews, this is something that I really like about this bike that pulls ahead over some of the other ones. The gear ratio for 1 through 5 is nice and tight, feels like a dirt bike, and number 6 is nice and tall, so it projects you on the road. We'll talk a little more about that in the road section. A new LCD display. I think the display on this bike is awesome. It's not too much and it's not too little. I think every modern day dual sport should have a display like this bike. It gives you a gear indicator, a gas gauge, tells you how many miles you're getting, a tachometer. Maybe I'm just spoiled with other bikes, but I feel like at the very least, a gas gauge is super helpful. New body design. Of course, the new plastics, new aggressive look, new sharper lines. The bike looks really mean and it looks like it's ready for off-road or wherever you want to take it. And lastly, of course, is the new price tag. Going back to our spec sheet, we can see that the Honda 300L has gained in price $250. And yes, for all the mentioned things above, only $250. So that's all the changes there, and we'll reference back to some of that stuff as we proceed further into the review, when it applies to that subsection. On-road experience. Let's get the on-road experience out of the way and move on to the good stuff. 250L having a softer suspension, I would say, is a little more smooth when it comes to bumps on the road. Handling the tarmac, as you would call it, feels more like pillows. The Honda 300L, of course, has more power, and it's a bit easier to get the speeds. With its close range transmission, I find it very easy to get it up to speed, say 50-60 miles per hour, in back roads. No problems there. As far as the freeway, the top speed on the 250L is 80 miles per hour, and the top speed of the 300L is 85 miles per hour. You might be questioning, well, all that was done to the engine, how come the top speeds are so similar? Well, that lies in the transmission. I'll give you just a little visual representation here, but basically what has happened is the 300L winds out its gears a bit quicker, getting you up to speed, which is marvelous. It gets you up to speed so much quicker, and then the 6th gear is a longer range. So it lends itself well to speeds up to, let's say, 65 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour, and once you get there, it starts to slow down as your descent to its top speed. Whereas the 250L felt very linear in its whole path to reach its top speed. In its class of dual sports, I feel the Honda 300L is the most comfortable dual sport on the road. Though these bikes aren't made for long travels on the road, this is the one I would pick. My recommendation, if you were going to buy any of these bikes and you have more than, let's say, a 20-minute commute, I would say at that point maybe look for a small adventure bike, maybe a KTM 390, a V-Strom, a KLR 650, or like a Tenere, something like that for longer drives. Because though it's completely doable with either of these bikes, it is a single-cylinder dual sport after all. It's not necessarily made for long highway commutes. Like I said, it can be done, but really where this bike thrives on the road is old back roads or city streets. Back roads getting up to 130 kilometers or 60 miles per hour. The good part though is both these bikes are true dual sports, which means you can ride them back and forth to work all week long for weeks in a row and still take it off the road for the weekends with no problems at all, not having to worry about reliability or valve checks or oil changes. For both of these bikes, the oil change sits around 8,000 miles or around 13,000 kilometers. So in this section, I would have to say the upgrades done to the 300L over the 250L are kind of mostly a lateral move when it comes to street performance. Now, if you wanted to turn the 300L into a supermoto and geared it down a bit, it would definitely shine over a supermoto 250L. I could see that, especially with its short range first 5 gears. You would zip around and have tons of flickability. But as the bike stands in dual sport fashion, I would say they're pretty even. Very small plus minus for either bike.
Guys, I hope you're liking the review so far. If you find any value in my videos, or if you watch more than one of my videos, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate it, and it'll help my channel grow. Next, we're going to move on to the off-road, so stay tuned.
I don't know. I just feel like I have better control with this one.
Yeah.
But I also feel like it goes faster.
That one's faster? Yeah. Well, it definitely has more power.
It has a better takeoff than mine does.
Yeah.
What do you think about the weight? Can you tell the difference?
I don't know about the weight.
Because everybody comments on the weight, but these bikes are like within 10 pounds. But everybody says that bike is light.
I don't feel the difference in weight. I just feel, I don't know. Obviously, it feels like more off-roady.
More maneuverable?
Maneuverable. Yeah.
All right.
That's all I got.
Cool. Thank you. Off-road performance. Okay, this is where you can see a bit of separation between the two bikes. The 300L really shines off-road. I don't think for the price there's a single bike out there that you can buy that's going to be more capable. And we're talking the new market, of course. As I've been swapping bikes with people who have far more expensive bikes, everyone seems to love the handling and the feel of the 300L and agrees that you get a ton of bike for your price. The 250L, it feels more like a dirt bike with a road motor in it, and that's because it is. Where the 300L, there was tons of attention to detail. Many improvements were made, and you can really feel that riding the bikes back to back. Both bikes have great tire sizes for off-road, which is a 21 rim up front and an 18 in the rear. That's super useful for mostly off-road and rolling over obstacles. And for off-road, once again, the 300L transmission is really great here. The close range of the first gears really lend itself well in tight trail, and the fuel injection gives you a very predictable linear power curve. The 300L just seems to have power in all RPM ranges, which is very useful in technical stuff, all the way up to hill climbs. Just like most dual sports, I would say the stock tires leave a lot to be desired. It's an easy fix though. If you want to do more off-road than on-road, then you look into something a little more aggressive. If you just want to do more pavement and some gravel roads, then the stock tires are fine. I myself personally ride a ton of sand, so the stock tires were removed by the first weekend. Side note, if you guys have dual sports and you want some suggestions on tires, just leave it in the comments below. At this point, I've tried tons of tires in many different terrains. So maybe I could give you my opinion on that and maybe help you out. The low end torque upgrade is really noticeable. You do feel it a bit on takeoffs, but where I feel it the most is on really tight turns. Maybe you're going around a tree and you dig in real deep, you put all your weight on top of your gas tank so that the front stays velcroed to the ground. As soon as you get around that bend, you start to transition back to a neutral position and you grab a handful of throttle and the torque really rips you right out of the hole. And I didn't really feel that with the 250L. Now, it would be remiss not to mention the suspension at this section. The 250L suspension is softer, but as I said, in a road area, if you're just mostly doing roads, that's not a bad thing. The 300L is more stiff and has more suspension travel. Now, here's where a lot of people complain. They say the suspension is too soft for even the 300L. And what I did is I just set my preload, and I ride mostly standing up, so it's all unsprung weight. It doesn't really seem to bother me. But I will also have to mention this. I am 235 pounds, 105 kilograms. If I ride any of these bikes that I've reviewed so far, the KLX300, the DRZ400, etc., I have to change my suspension anyhow. The stock suspension on these bikes, turn all the way up, is made for somebody that's like 175 pounds, 79 kilograms. That weight of riders at best. So for me, no matter what bike I buy, the suspension's going to change. But all that being said, you do notice the difference in the suspension of the 300L being more off-road oriented than the 250. Alright, let's talk about maintenance and reliability. By now you guys probably already know that these bikes are notorious for lasting forever. It goes without saying that Honda itself has a name when it comes to reliability, but a step further is this modified CBR engine. There's tons of other people who have put tens of thousands of miles on these bikes, and as I mentioned before on the road use, the service intervals are nice and spaced out to the point where you're never going to cringe when it comes to riding your bike on the road. Now looking at the service manuals, the maintenance intervals are identical, which oil changes after the break-in period happen every 8,000 miles or 12.8 thousand kilometers, and even suggest that if you can manage to put 25,000 kilometers on your bike within 1 year, then you may have to change the filter every other oil change. I would say it's safe to say that most people aren't going to get to this point, and they'll probably be doing a frequency of 1 year oil changes. The only other hard time limit is the radiator coolant, which is every 3 years, and I also suggest that every 2 years bleed your brakes. Brake fluid is hygroscopic, basically means it absorbs moisture out of the air and becomes less efficient and could boil and also start to compress. So good rule of thumb I would say is every other year. Also, chain maintenance probably every 1 to 2 weeks, and you have a bike that's probably going to last forever. There's not much to say here, but I did want to cover it for all the new people looking for dual sports. These bikes have one of the most lengthy service intervals and reliability records that you can get. Looks and aesthetics. I would say when you put the bikes side by side, you can see there's an edge on the 300L. The improvements in the slimmer body, also with the sharper lines, complement each other very well. I also love the fact that all the 300Ls come with the black rims, and I threw some decals on mine. I don't think it would go as well with the silver rims. There's also a bit of difference in the radiator shroud, and just overall, the 300L looks more aggressive. Now, looks are subjective. Maybe you like the 250L better, but me personally, I think the 300L looks amazing. Alright, so let's talk about which one should you buy. That to me is going to depend a lot on what you want to do with the bike, as well as your price range. Because the Honda 300L is out, it means a lot of people are offering up their 250Ls for pretty fair value. Depending on your area, you can pick one up $3,000 to $4,000 at very low mileage. If you're a beginner, I would say one of the best bikes you can grow into is the Honda 300L, and I don't mean that BS that people say grow into as in they trick people into getting bikes that are way out of their league and they're dangerous and they gotta kinda hope that they don't get hurt in the first year. I'm talking about the Honda 300L is a very good beginner bike. The power is very linear, it's very forgiving, and the slipper clutch makes it very approachable for anyone with very little motorcycle experience. Also, you could drop this bike 50 times and it's still going to pick right back up and start right up again. Also, there's a high ceiling of where you could take the power on this bike. Being it's a stroked engine, you could still get a big bore kit, you could hone out the cylinder and marginally pull ahead with power of any other bike in its 300cc class. performance, coupled with an ECU, an exhaust, an intake, and you have a really powerful bike. And speaking of an ECU, I have a brand new one here, calibrated for my exhaust, and that's going to be put in a future video. So stay tuned for that, guys. But there's a lot of power to be eked out of this engine. But I have to say again, there's never been a time where I sat and thought to myself, you know what, I wish this bike just was a little more powerful. Or if I had a little more power, I'd be able to do this or that. That just doesn't happen with this bike. The only limitation on this bike is the rider. It can climb anything, it can drive through anything. It all depends on you and how good you are as a rider. Personal opinion, all the power you would ever need, single track and trails, is somewhere between the 20 and 30 horsepower / 20 and 30 pounds of torque range. You're getting the happy medium of having the nice extended service intervals, but also not having to adjust your valves every 3 times you take your bike out, like some other high compression, high performance dirt bikes that are plated and people call them dual sports. So once again, it's really up to you. If you're a beginner, you could get away with either bike. If you want a bike that you can tweak on and make even more powerful, I would lean towards the 300L. And if your budget's small, you can get a 250L and have tons of fun on that as well. So it boils down to which one you should buy is all based on personal preference and your personal needs and your budget, of course. So let's move into my final thoughts. My final thoughts riding these bikes side by side. It's pretty clear that the 300L made leaps and bounds and is a very good bike. But if you're just trying to get into dual sporting, there's nothing wrong with a 250L. Of course, neither of these bikes are the most powerful thing on the block, but it's reliable and it's a solid entry to the dual sport world. As you see more and more 300Ls become available, I think you're going to find a lot more following for this bike. Obviously, if I had to choose between the two, I would take the 300L. Being a more advanced rider, I would spend the extra couple $1,000s to get the 300L over the 250L. Also, there's something about having a bike brand new, owning it yourself, and knowing that all the service intervals, it's always been taken care of and never beat, never left in the rain. That's one reason why I really like buying a bike new. And I do understand not everyone can do that because of life, money situations, etc. But sometimes it's nice just to have something to yourself. The most interesting thing about having this 300L and actually liking it is that you get tons of people that talk bad about the bike that never even rode the bike. They compare it to some bike they have and that they've rode just because of specs on paper, and yet they never experienced the 300L themselves. And they'll be in the comments below this video or some other videos talking about how their bike they had is better, or I don't know what I'm talking about, or I'm an idiot. But that's fine. It's all a matter of opinion. And if you guys find any value in this video whatsoever of me taking the time to make this, then please give me a subscribe and a thumbs up and help this channel grow. I am moving forward with some of my 10RA content, but overall this channel is always going to be mostly about the Honda 300L. That's not going to change. There's so much more to do and so much more to explore with this bike when it comes to upgrades, capabilities, places to go, that there's an endless amount of content and fun things to do with the Honda 300L. I bought the 300L off the lot, paid a lot of money, but after riding the 250L, this wasn't a small bit of upgrades, and it truly makes a difference and makes this bike stand alone and be completely different. It's not the same bike, it's its own thing, and it's a lot of fun. So I hope you guys enjoyed, hope you guys stay safe out there. My name is Andrew, and this is Motorcycles Off-Road. Thanks for watching, guys.